Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. Well, what's also very important is that while I stand here and present this, there are a number of people at various levels, researchers, forest officials, in the government, journalists, who have actually done a lot of work. Some of them are not even able to kind of come up front and be visible and be named and be seen because of the concerns that they have. So it's a lot of people who have actually put this together. And for the book to happen, great gratitude to Frontline and to Vaishna for kind of making it happen. It's just come out and we've had some good response, and hopefully it'll kind of generate the interest and the concern that we've been trying to put across with this book. What I'll do in the next 15-20 minutes is run you through just some aspects of what this project is and why some of us are so concerned. And I'm quite convinced that once you see what is on what's available, you will also have that concern. And I must just say that what I will point out to are just the tip of the iceberg where the concerns are involved. I mean, it's at every single level. There's so many problems with this project, and I'm just going to pick out a few that I have a little bit of a grip on, and which will give you a sense of what is kind of happening. So the book, as you know, is the Great Nicobar Betrayal. It is about this island of Great Nicobar, which is in the extreme south. I'll show you a map of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It's a pretty large island by the island standards. It's about 900 plus square kilometers, densely forested, a very small human population of 5,000 people, of which about 20% are the indigenous communities. And that itself is a very interesting history, which of course we don't have time to go into. But this project that was kind of, has been around for a very long time. This development of Great Nicobar, for various reasons, has been in the air for a very, very long time, for decades. But what we saw about 3-4 years ago is an immense push, a very coordinated push at the political and the bureaucratic level to make things happen, as it were. What the project entails is this 130, 160 square kilometers of this island, largely on the eastern coast and the southeastern coast. And you can see there are these 4 components, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is the area that's going to be taken up for the particular project. It was actually started off formally in March of 2021 through a report by AECOM India Private Limited, which is the consultancy agency in Gurgaon, actually asked for by the Niti Aayog. And they proposed this massive, massive project. It's 72,000 crores, that's roughly $10 billion of investment in this one little island far away from where we are sitting. There are 4 components to the project. The heart of the project is this, what's number 1, which is the International Container Transshipment Port at an estimated budget of something like 40,000 crores. There is a airport that is kind of being proposed at number 2. And as a matter of fact, even as we speak, there's a lot of discussion going on a social impact assessment document that is extremely violative of multiple things even as we speak. They released a report and they said we'll have a public hearing in 4 days or 5 days. When the law mandates there should be a month. People have taken objection to that, so that's going on. Then there is this massive kind of, real estate kind of project, if one was to put it that way. This almost 100 odd square kilometers of a tourism and a township project, where the plan says metro rail and all kinds of stuff. And then there is there's a power plant over here. So this just, as like I mentioned earlier, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are here. We have the Andamans in the north. We have the 10-degree channel, the 10-degree latitude that separates the Andamans from the Nicobars. This is Great Nicobar. It's one of the largest islands in this entire chain. The total area of these island chain is about 8,000 square kilometers, of which this one single island itself is about 1,000 square kilometers. So that's pretty large by the standards of the islands. And it's the southernmost tip of political India. If you look at Kanyakumari, this is like about 6.5 degrees north latitude. And I just want to kind of point your attention to the star, which is just off the coast of Sumatra. This is the epicenter of the earthquake of December 2004, that massive earthquake that caused that massive tsunami. We're exactly in the 20th year. And like Advaita said in the beginning, what is being proposed here will actually cause more damage than what that tsunami caused. And I'll show you what that tsunami actually did and why the concerns were there. Now, the issues of concern, like I mentioned, are across everything. I mean, there is ecological, there is the geological, there's about the indigenous people, 2 small communities in that island that have been there for thousands of years. There's a complete violation of their rights in everything that this project is doing. There's the economic angle that needs to be looked into. There's the legal aspect and also that of due process. And like I said in the beginning, I'll just give you a snapshot of some of these issues in the interest of time and what we can really catch up to. It is a spectacular landscape. I'm not a biologist, but I've spent some time there. And it's also a place where any substantial scientific expedition comes up with something new every time they go in there. So these are very spectacular tree fern forests in parts of the island. The charismatic kind of iconic species, one of the iconic species is this bird from Great Nicobar known as the Nicobari megapode. It's an endemic. It's found on maybe 5 or 6 islands in the entire Nicobar chain, nowhere else on planet Earth. And where the project is proposed are among the most prominent nesting sites of this particular bird. A very interesting behavior, and it lays its eggs in a mound of earth. It does not incubate them like the conventional birds do. So there are very interesting aspects of this particular landscape. The giant leatherback turtle, the largest of the 7 species of sea turtles that inhabit planet Earth. It is there from the time of the dinosaurs. It's a large creature, can be 6-7 feet in length, 600-700 kilograms in weight. And the Nicobar Islands, and particularly that site 1 that I showed you where the port is coming up, is believed to be one of the most important nesting sites of the giant leatherback in the entire northern Indian Ocean. I will show you some pictures of that as well. So we have many, many creatures, a huge biological diversity, rich, rare, unique, endemic, that stands to be lost if this project is allowed to come up. Now, this is what I was trying to tell you. This is number 1. This is a slightly initial design of the port that is going to come up, this 40,000 crore port project that is there. Now, this is the beach. This is the river Galathia that comes into the sea, and the bay is named after the river. This is a 2.5 kilometer long beach, a beautiful, wide, silvery sand, soft beach on which these turtles nest. Other species do as well. And the bay today, it was a wildlife sanctuary till a few years ago. This bay has an opening of about 3 kilometers, which presumably the turtles are using to enter for nesting. Now, part of the construction project, obviously, involves the construction of breakwaters, which will restrict the opening of the bay from 3 kilometers to 300 meters. So a 90% reduction in the entry of the possibility, and leave alone this, then what will happen to construction, noise pollution, oil pollution, etc., etc. And the leading scientific agencies and government agencies of the country, including the Wildlife Institute of India, are on record to say this is okay, and the turtles will not actually be affected. So in a meeting of the National Board for Wildlife, when this project was put up for clearance, the director of the WII then, 3 years ago, is on record to say it's okay. And there's some very interesting language in the permission that was granted, which is there in the public domain and I can share with you. What's also amazing about the giant leatherback, with some research done by Dakshin Foundation from Bangalore and the Andaman and Nicobar Forest Department and others, shows that these turtles that nest in the Andaman and Nicobar waters on the beaches were satellite tagged, and only 4 individuals, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe a little longer. They swim as far as the African coast on the western side and the Australian coast on the eastern side. So this great traveler, this great mariner, this mother turtle is coming to the islands, nesting, and then traveling all over the world. And this is the most important nesting site in the entire northern Indian Ocean. We lose it completely. There might be other sites, they might adapt, but we are putting to sword what is perhaps the most important nesting site that we know in this part of the world. And like I was telling somebody the other day, that we always keep complaining about how our bureaucracy does not work. But if you want an example of clinical precision and aggression and coordination and delivery, we should look at how this project was actually cleared. Within 2.5 years, they have done a huge amount of maneuvering and managing to let it happen. I'll just give you an example of some of the problems at a different level. So this is a National Marine Turtle Action Plan that was released by the ministry. And as you can see, the then Environment Minister, on 19th of January 2021, he signs off this document, in which you will see that Galathia Bay in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the largest turtle nesting ground in India, it's considered to be one of the most important marine turtle habitats, right? That is, if I go back, that is the 19th of January 2021. But 15 days earlier, in a meeting of the National Board for Wildlife, under the watch of this very minister, The Galathea Bay Turtle Wildlife Sanctuary, which was notified in 1990, is denotified, with the explicit language in the permission saying that we have to denotify it because this port has to come up. So even before this a kind of committee has, or the minister has signed off, they have actually, so it's like, and maybe the Marine Turtle Action Plan will go to one platform and say, oh, we are showing so much of concern. On the other hand, they have completely taken off all the legal protection to the most important nesting site of this turtle in the country. And actually, in an RTI that somebody filed, the Wildlife Institute of India said that we have not done any studies on turtles in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The Wildlife Institute of India has had no experience. It's a very reputed organization. They have done some great amount of work, but they have no work in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands on turtles, and yet they have the authority to clear the project and denotify the site for the project to happen. So I'm just saying that. So on the one hand, the law has been followed. You've gone to the concern, you've minuted them, you've gone to the meetings, you've gone to the agencies, you have put them for discussion, you followed due process. But this is the kind of thing that we actually see. I'm quickly going to jump to the indigenous tribal people part of it. There are many dimensions there, but how the institutions that are meant to be in charge and responsible for the welfare of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable communities. Here is a statement from the Tribal Welfare Directorate, which is primarily tasked with the welfare of the indigenous communities in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And they very explicitly say that they will facilitate the clearance of the project by allowing for tribal land to be used for aspects of the project. So the very person or the very institutions that are supposed to protect are actually giving away, are kind of chipping away at what has to be protected. And this is the initial projection in that earlier report. An island of 900 square kilometers, where today's population is 5,000. The projections are that in 50 years, by 2050, in 20 years, we will have, the island have 6.5 lakh people. Imagine the total population of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands today is 5 lakhs. So what does it mean? So what is somebody thinking? What are they thinking? I have no clue. And then you can imagine what will happen to one landscape. And imagine what will happen to 500 tribal people, vulnerable forest-dwelling communities, when you're going to push 600,000 people onto them in a process like this. And when an objection was raised to this, they said, okay, we'll make it 3 lakh people. Actually, so the final document is there'll be 3 lakh people by 2050. So one really doesn't know what they're doing, as a matter of fact. They also don't know, I think. And then, the level of lack of understanding and sensitivity, in one of the initial documents, there's this concern that the project site is close to the Shompen habitat, which is a tribal community, and the project, therefore, is possibility of trespassing. So the solution is to barricade areas by barbed wires. Which world and which universe are these people living? I mean, can it be done? Is it going to work? What does it mean at all? So it's complete afterthought, complete lack of sensitivity, complete lack of, everything. Now, I'm just coming quickly to the dimension of what I showed you in the beginning, the tsunami. So the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are a part of what's known as the Ring of Fire, right around the Pacific Ocean, where we have the maximum number of earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis. So that's where the Andaman and Nicobar are. The Andaman Islands, we know, has the only active volcano in India, that is Barren Island. And that is why that earthquake of December 26, 2004, which actually happened just off the coast of Indonesia, is only 100 nautical miles south of where this project is coming up. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands on an average have 1 earthquake a week. There was one yesterday morning. There are only 3 on the Richter scale, 5 on the Richter scale, not 9 on the Richter scale that happened in December 2004, but it's a constantly shaking landscape because that is the geology of the place. So this is an old map of what happened when the earthquake happened, and this is very important to keep in mind. This actually is from a story I did for the Frontline many years ago, just after the earthquake. So while we all remember December 2004 for the tsunami, what the earthquake did in these islands is very interesting. Like a child's seesaw goes up and down, one side down and one side up in a playground, the islands actually shifted. The Andaman Islands came up that morning by about 4 feet. So you see here plus 1 to 2 meters of uplift. And Great Nicobar, Indira Point, southernmost tip of India, where this project is going to come up, saw a permanent subsidence of about 5 meters that morning. 5 meters of permanent subsidence in the blink of an eye. And this is the coastline, this is the landscape on which you're going to put this 40, 50,000, 60,000 crores worth of investment. It's actually a disaster economically also, because one more event of that kind and all that investment is gone, leave alone ecology, tribal people, etc., etc. This is a WAPCOS document. And see, this is the evidence of what's happened. This lighthouse at Indira Point, this is a pre-earthquake tsunami picture. And you can see where it is located. It's maybe 40, 50 meters above the high tide line. And this is the same lighthouse standing here today. It's standing in water. That's because that land subsided. And as a matter of fact, this bay over here, if I'm right, is the bay where the port is going to come out. And this is in a 2019 document by WAPCOS. It says the topography of the island is best suited, which has not been damaged much by the tsunami of December. They got the date wrong, but we can grant that. So they are saying that this landscape is not a damaged landscape. So it's okay to put the port over here. This is the kind of lies, this is the kind of falsification that has actually been happening and being allowed. In the EIA report, which is, every one of you will know, is at the heart of the environmental clearance process. I'll give you just two examples of the shoddiness, of the pettiness, of the lack of scientific rigor. I mean, leave alone rigor. Such pathetic quality. This is a statement from the EIA report, the basis of which, on the basis of which the environment clearance was granted. And just read this. Added to the problem was biting insects, including mosquitoes. Further, when one tries to look upwards to find out what the tree is, it is not just one but many. Now, it was impossible to use any measuring devices like tape to make any quadrant in the forest vegetation. Hence, intense survey was carried out on both sides of the Campbell Indira Point for 4 days. It is about 45 kilometers and the entire stretch was surveyed 8 times. A child would do a better report of something that was there in the backyard in our houses. And we are writing off 130, 140, 50 square kilometers of the finest tropical forests in this country with work like this. And this has been approved. The ministries, committees have said okay to this. And I forgot to mention that in Parliament, the Environment Minister a year ago said, at least 1 million trees are going to be cut for this project. In this moment of climate crisis, what does it mean to cut down 1 million trees for something like this based on such shoddy work? This is one of the environment clearance conditions. Trees with nesting holes of endemic owls to be identified and geotagged with the help of SACON. Such trees shall be safeguarded as far as possible. So if there's any bird watcher here, you will know how difficult it is to find an owl, leave alone a nesting hole of an owl, in a tropical forest of 160 square kilometers, where trees go up about maybe 100 feet in height, with this kind of, EIA report that we saw on the earlier slide. What hope in hell do we have of anything meaningful happening? So, repeatedly this kind of keeps happening. And I'm finishing here, and to top it up, and there are many things to top it up, is that 130 square kilometers of forest to be lost in the Great Nicobar Island will be compensated by 260 square kilometers of land to be identified as forest in guess where? Haryana. So this whole business of compensatory afforestation, which many of us, many scholars, researchers, ecologists have been very worried about, it has been taken to its complete absurd limit over here. And it has been approved. The system allows for that to happen. Now, where is the equivalence in what way? So, ethically, ecologically, legally, it's all completely problematic. So, this is what is at stake. This is what's happening. And, we just might have a Haryani Maigapur. I don't put it past our system, whether it's a scientific system or a bureaucratic system too. And actually, there's something in the works that they want to move some of these animals to Haryana. Something is going on. So this may not be really the figment of my imagination. It is the creation of the Indian scientific and bureaucratic system. So this is, the frontline issue has gone from this, Vaishna. This is the cover issue that, so we've also been doing other things. I'm just finishing quickly. Just today we've released this very detailed timeline. You can scan the QR. It is a timeline of 20 pages which has about 180 dates, where each date in this project has been mapped, and each date is backlinked into a Google Drive where you have access to the original document. So if anybody is interested in researching the project, accessing the documents, please take this, you can write to me, I will send it to you. But it was because so many people were asking us, and we ourselves could not keep track of all what was happening. Some of us got together and we did this, and it's ended up being a pretty useful resource. And this is how the timeline looks. So as you will see, March 2021 is when AECOM publishes that PFR for the project. And January 2022, there is the public hearing that's held in Campbell Bay. So we have every single date that's happened mapped on. And the PDF has a link which you can go and access the original document if you're interested. Quickly on the book, we have 4 sections. One talks to the history of the project, one on ecological concerns, and then the tribal issue. And there's a 4th section where Norma Alvarez, very well-known advocate, and who wrote a piece for the leaflet, she gave us permission to use it. She talks about the developments in the NGT, because some people have taken the matter to the National Green Tribunal. We've not been very successful. But she writes a very incisive piece on what is the problem in the way the NGT has approached the whole thing. We have a timeline in the project. And yeah, so this is just another book that we did recently, which also has some of the material on this project. So I will, that's it. Yeah, so I'm going to stop here. I have some answers to what can be done, but maybe we can discuss that later and leave it for now. And thank you very much for your time and for listening in and for coming, of course. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Lovely to see so many people. You know, you're always worried that there's not enough concern about something happening so far away from you in a tiny island. And every time I see people showing concern, I get really moved by this. Pankaj, as Pankaj said briefly, early last year, sometime in January, we decided to do a cover package in Frontline about this upcoming project on Great Nicobar. And some excellent pieces were written. Pankaj did the lead story. And then we decided to look at it from various angles, from the ecological angle, from the topographical angle, the fact that it sits on these earthquake fault lines. Then we looked at, of course, the flora, fauna, the danger to that. There was a story piece on that. There was a piece on the concerns of the tribal the indigenous population there. It was a fabulous cover package, if I may say so. And Pankaj then later told us that it had sort of been picked up by so many people, and that it had brought this topic to the forefront of the conversation in many places. And subsequently, it was his idea that we should possibly take that set of articles as well as more published in various other publications and put it together in the form of a book. And the Hindu group, of which Frontline is a part, has a publications division. We call it the Special Books Division. And we took up that project, and the other publications were very kind to give their permission. The writers were very kind to give their permission. And Pankaj, of course, did all the hard work of collating and getting it all together. And then we published it as a book, and my Frontline team designed and edited it. And, you know, it was funny because it was they would do it in between publishing the regular issues of the magazine. So we are a fortnightly, and we have a lean week, and then we have what we call a planning week, and then we have a production week. So planning week, all the book work would be done by, the Vineet and Biraj and so on. And then, of course, they'd descend fully into production of the magazine. So it was like, it was difficult, but we pulled it off. And thank you. I was delighted to work on this with Pankaj. And Pankaj has been really doing so much to promote the book as well. I was listening to him talk, and I thought to myself that if we can take elephants all the way from the far east of the country to the far west for medical treatment, why not a Haryanvi megaport? It's something that seems to be completely, par for the course these days. I thought, Lawrence, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you think about this proposed project on Great Nicobar? What, according to you, is the chief concern? What worries you the most?
No, first of all, I kind of feel humbled actually to be here with Pankaj. And I follow closely what he writes in Frontline. And of course, he puts out this newsletter called the productive areas update, which over maybe 1 decade, 2 decades I've followed, 3 decades, very, very closely. And that's where my education comes up, because we can all claim we are this and that, but quite often on matters on the ground, when it comes to issues like ecology and so on, we need people like Pankaj. Because they're there, they're on the ground and everything. So when I was called, I was but surprised. Because I've always liked his writing and I've loved to review his books. Sometimes I manage to review it, sometimes I'm behind the queue. One of the books I'll talk to you about. I've never been in the Andaman, so I don't know how many of you have been there. But it's absolutely shocking. And of course, in the last 10 years, if I may venture a little into life in India after June 4th, we were also in a sense of paralysis about what to do, how to do, and so on. And when something like this happens, and when I read all this and this presentation today, it reeked of a particular individual, and I don't mind mentioning his name, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Because the first time I encountered Mr. Amitabh Kant was at the Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, among celebrities of people from the Foreign Service of Bangkok, very, very senior professors, everything. And then at the meeting, he said, that was his first meeting outside. I don't mind talking about it because it's nothing. He said, and there were, of course, businessmen and others. And he said, if there's any law that you want changed, tell me, he said. I was shocked. I was shocked, but when the meeting finished, my friends all came out and said, my God, we have such great regard for India's system of administration, sitting particularly Thais, such a long history of fairly stable governments, some, however broken, very good checks and balances and so forth. And that particular event, maybe 10 years, 10 years after, came back to me when I was hearing Pankaj. Because that is the way, I held the Planning Commission chair. The chair is broken and gone. There's no Planning Commission. We have only what is called Niti Aayog. And Niti Aayog is there for doing this, and for whose bidding you can guess. So that is the first shock, that outside of everything. And I read through the book, of course I read all the things earlier, and I'll come back to the book again. So there's really nothing one can say from the extraordinarily rich material is brought to us, for which you must be grateful. But the question I wanted to ask him is, I don't think I found it anywhere in the book. Why did you call it Great Betrayal? Because I'll start there.
No, everything that is valuable in that place is such a big fraud is being committed upon that place. So, it's a betrayal of the place, of the people, of everything that that place stands for. And for me, from the beginning, because in another where I had written Great Nicobar's Great Betrayal or something. So the idea that we are betraying that place somehow is almost organic from my thinking. I never really thought about why I would say that. But when I look back, and we had this discussion about the title, and there was some concern at Frontline as well. But I said, there's nothing. It is a betrayal out and out at various levels. So I didn't even have a second thought. I had a bit of an argument a discussion with Vaishna, saying, no, we should call it a betrayal because this is what it is.
Yeah, I know.
And at so many levels.
And Lawrence, what you said about this gentleman saying that if you want any law change, just come to me. And that's precisely what has happened. The ways in which environmental laws have been diluted, forest laws have been diluted in the last 10 years is a matter of great concern. And those are the loopholes, isn't it, Pankaj, that have been exploited to even think of a project like this on a fragile island like Great Nicobar.
I think that's interesting because a lot of the changes that have taken place are relatively more recent. So what I find striking about this is that actually everything on paper is in place. It's very difficult to point out. If one digs in, you can see, for example, I didn't discuss this, but there's the forest clearance process, which goes to the Forest Advisory Committee. And between October 2020, when this project was actually proposed for forest clearance, and 22, when the clearance was given, the Forest Advisory Committee had 26 meetings. And this project was not listed for discussion on any of those meetings, not on the agenda of one of them. It is not there in the minutes of any of the meetings. But in October 2022, the Forest Advisory Committee has signed off on the forest clearance. So if one goes into that much detail and points out, breakdown of the process, then yes, but otherwise, they have forest clearance. The environment clearance about the owls that I spoke about, that went through many meetings. But so in some senses, in many cases, they have followed and kind of taken care of
What
this.
sort of following is this? Isn't this simply just a ticking of boxes?
Absolutely.
It, yeah.
The boxes have been ticked.
Exactly.
And that is what the process demands.
Yeah.
I mean, so when we went to the NGT, I didn't go, but colleagues, Ashish, my colleague in Kalpavriksha, and the Conservation Action Trust, the NGT says Environment Ministry has given clearance because they have followed due process.
So that
So in
makes
that
it
sense-
harder to fight it in court then?
No, so that might be the last recourse. And it'll have to go through the process. So go through, because the NGT would be the first port of call. Then maybe the relevant High Court, and then maybe the Supreme Court. So it depends on how it goes. But coming back to the point is that, yes, there is violation, and there's no violation, because it's all there on paper. So that's a very interesting thing. It's very well thought out. So every single point was discussed in the National Board for Wildlife. One can say that, oh, how can you give the clearance? But that might be your opinion or my opinion. But we discussed it, and the so-called experts and the concerned experts have given the permission. Having said that, yes, there are, for instance, the CRZ 1A, which is where coral reef and mangroves, you cannot do anything. Part of where the port and stuff is supposed to come up, there is stuff like that. So in that sense, they could be considered violations, and this has been pointed out in articles before the NGT and stuff like that. And also, just one small point is, the indigenous communities have actually gave an initial permission, and then they realized what's at stake, and they have publicly said we withdraw our permissions. And I think we cover that in the book, and there's a letter of the Constitution Conduct Group on that as well. So you're right in that sense, but on the other hand, seems to have covered all tracks.
So this kind of duality, I think adds up to the idea of the betrayal. This kind of speaking with a forked tongue that we're seeing all the time. So writing in his thing, Amitabh Ghosh calls it disaster capitalism. So so we should talk about that. When we put development right at the top and there's nothing else matters, how would you like to react to that?
No,
Also, your point on the betrayal, you had something in mind, yeah.
No, I'll come back to the Great Betrayal, because it's funny in this, after a decade, when citizens have been accused of betrayal, the state is actually betraying the people of Andaman. We'll come back to that. Where did you leave off? I went just to follow that track.
I was just talking about
Disaster capitalism. No, I was also, that's what first struck me, because after the tsunami, Naomi Klein wrote this very beautiful book called Disaster Capitalism. Because there in her book, in Disaster Capitalism, she basically talks of how very powerful private interests, using the tsunami, are taking over natural spaces, private spaces, and so on. But in this case, it just looks like a very peculiar Indian version of disaster capitalism originating from Delhi. I'm also thinking of the bullet train from Bombay to Surat in a period of climate change. Wouldn't go there. But what also, the other thing that I really wanted to ask you, you mentioned the tsunami, 2004. The document that was signed was 2021. We've forgotten something in between, the COVID crisis, the COVID pandemic. Now, there's any amount of scientific literature coming on the COVID pandemic that says that if you go and disturb settled habitat of centuries, you will let into the air so many unknown viruses and other things. And matter of fact, the post-COVID research, literally, I've been following it very closely for some other reasons, but it is, because first you make the kind of anecdotal connection. You know, most of us start with anecdotal connections between an event of that sort and then something else and casual conversation. But here we get very clear scientific evidence that there is a very clear connection that if you go and destroy natural habitats, you dig, you put these huge JCBs can go and dig up thousands of years or 2,000 years of soil settled. We have no clue what is there in the soil and what will come out. From that point of view, and it's frightening, we all lived through the COVID crisis. The whole world lived through it. So when I saw this 221 signed, 2019 was the, 2020 was the COVID, was there no connections of made of that kind? That's one kind of question. Second is, of course, I mentioned Amitabh Kant because he's somebody I want to bring him up in public. He's the man, the shadow behind many things. But more importantly, the question I want to ask Pankaj is, who's driving this within Andaman and Nicobar? Recently, the BJP has won the parliamentary seat in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It's very obvious it is possibly the trader, mercantile type of lobbies that are there and who are the people who win it. But are there people inside Andaman who are driving it? Who's driving it beyond what the bureaucracy and the state is doing in terms of this betrayal? Any idea?
So I think my answer to that is it's really driven from outside the islands. Now, in the islands, and I think there might be a few friends from the islands here in the audience. They did come for the talk in Champaka. See, there is three things if I might try to answer this. One is it's really the vision from somewhere else. And historically in the islands, because of the nature, the history, the accessibility, the control of the bureaucracy, the control of Delhi, there is very, very little say. There is also at the same time the aspiration of something that's much larger. And how a lot of this has been sold, going back to former chief secretaries like Vivek Rai and all these people, saying this is the new Hong Kong, this is the new Dubai, this is the new Singapore. So those are the images and the aspirations that are being. And there is also, in some senses, because of distance, isolation, lack of infrastructure, people in some senses, I'm talking of the settlers, because there's also a lot of calibration that needs to take place. We have the indigenous communities, we have the what are called the local bonds, who are descendants of the settlers, of the people who were imprisoned in the cellular jail. There are more recent settlers, etc., etc. The more recent crowd does feel a little deprived. And they do see this activism as coming in the way of development. And here you have this massive project that is offering them everything that they think is theirs. And the irony is that some of the fundamental things that should be given, the system completely fails. So for instance, I did this piece for the Hindu 2-3 years ago. A ship sailing from Port Blair to Nicobar, big ship, had a break in the hull. It almost drowned with people on board. Now, in an island system, we are not able to give people good, safe, leave alone comfortable shipping. And then when they see something of this kind which seems to offer, so I think, but that's really, they're very small players. I think what is driving this, Lawrence, is the best I can think is some, illusory idea of development, growth, this kind of being superpower, this economic control, this. So, the logic is you're sitting on the Malacca Straits. So there's the strategic impact, there is this business that we will gain.
But Pankaj, if I might interrupt you over there, isn't it a bit too idealistic for us to say that we cannot have development here? Sure. And for us as well to impose this idea of the tribal idyll, the undisturbed forest land, where, as you yourself mentioned, there are local aspirations as well, where they want that television set and they want that concrete house. So how does one balance this? And in that sense, how do you then approach a development project, and how do you approach development itself on an island like this? Do we say no to all development, or do we calibrate it in some way? How do we do this?
I think this is a very important question, and I don't mind saying I don't necessarily have all the answers. But a project like this certainly does not seem to be the answer to the needs of the people. What they are asking, what they need, is not going to come this way, because this is not for them. Even the communities there are going to get marginalized in a project like this because the land is going to be taken over. Yeah. And in this particular case, if you look at the magnitude of what is proposed, and I'm even suggesting that we're actually going to increase the vulnerability and the risk of the place and the people and the investment and everything. You put in 300,000 people on a coastline where we have an earthquake and another tsunami.
Not to mention fresh water, we don't have fresh
Absolutely,
water, we don't have
absolutely,
drainage
absolutely.
and sanitation.
So whether we have this vision of this, it can only be done like this. Because who's driving it is not necessarily, leave alone concerned, even aware of the realities in that place, in my understanding.
Yeah.
So finally it becomes an outpost. It's that, adjunct of the larger nation state, where we will do what we want in the interest of the larger nation state. So I used to have this friend, and you carried the review, the obituary, Zubair Ahmed, this fantastic journalist who passed away very tragically 2 years ago. He would say, he understood, one of the few people who understood, and he would say, कि हमारा फिर वजूद क्या है? What is our identity? Who are we? If you're always going to tell us you will be the next Singapore or you will be the next Hong Kong, then who are we then? And we have to look at ourselves from within. And Samir Acharya, the other person many people know, would always say, why is swimming not a part of the school curriculum in an island system like this? Why don't we have good shipping? So I think the question you're asking is very valid, and that's what local people are asking. But is this the way to do it at this cost? Can't there be other ways of imagining? Because the imagination is of a different order and trying to achieve something else.
No, when you talk of that, it kind of, having spent more than half of my life in Asia, and I keep reflecting back to Asia, whether it's Japan or Thailand or others. When this whole last 10 years emerged, I used to think of the discussions in Philippines about development, authoritarianism, and all the literature. When you go back and read the literature, the articles of Marcos around that period, you can say you're reading it like what's happening in India. The other thing what I was thinking about, and I don't know whether we have done, we've kind of connected the dots. One is, of course, disaster capitalism. Okay, and there are other aspects to disaster. I mentioned the COVID, we'll talk about it. The other thing I was thinking about is, from 2014 onwards, there seems to be some notion of mega capitalism. Now, I forget the name of the Prime Minister in Japan, whose time the mega capitalism was inaugurated. Mega capitalism both within Japan and in terms of Japan's reach to the rest of Asia. And there have been excellent, journal articles, others written about this mega capitalism, where you start imagining that everything has to be done on another scale. Okay? That only if it's done on that scale can development happen. So in a sense, it's trying to give a new meaning to development. In the so-called earlier period, we talk of development in terms of providing jobs, various other things. Then we talk about, of course, we've been talking about how many trillion economy, I don't remember now, but we keep talking about it. But then the leadership begins to think, we can't wait to become whatever.
Yeah.
So we can do it only by maximizing the size, thinking in big terms. And this mega capitalism, what I thought was there. Because the other thought that went through my mind is, when I asked you, who's driving this? Quite often, projects like these are driven by the multilateral banks, World Bank, ADB, and so on, because they have to survive by lending money. Otherwise, they have no rationale for surviving. Only if they lend, they can get their interest back, and they do it. And in most projects, whether it's water, roads, even mega projects, you will find the imprint of the World Bank or the ADB. World Bank, of course, has become a completely weakened organization. ADB is there. The ADB is driven by the Japanese. Is there a Japanese footprint on it? I don't see it.
There's another...
No. So therefore, like if you were to kind of leave outside all this and look at this as some kind of James Bond story.
There's a slightly more, I think, obvious thing, sort of motivation there, because strategically it's a very important spot. So if you are very concerned about China's string of pearls policy, then that becomes a sort of a place that you might want to, and it could be a way for you to keep your eyes on the entire shipping route over there. So that, for that reason, for strategic reasons, Great Nicobar becomes an important location. And therefore, defense could also be one of the reasons why they are considering this in such a big way. And then it becomes all the more difficult to oppose it, because then it becomes, national security and so on.
Nowhere in what you presented does the security or defense angle come up. Number
That's
one.
what I wanted to say.
Number two.
Yeah, sorry.
Another thing is, and I looked at that area, particularly in the context of the East Asian Highway and so on, which is mega projects. If you look at Burma and then the Malacca Straits and those areas, even from a security point of view, you're actually exposing yourself. You're not strengthening yourself. Number one. Number two, that particular area we're more concerned around, because one of the things you said is transshipment. Transshipment has been something worrying us a long time, because ships now have to, they do transshipment now in Singapore, in Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
and then it comes. And this is why even the Rameshwaram side, they want to dredge it and make sure the ships can come through. Because it takes a longer route to come that side. And this transshipment business has been worrying us for a long time. But even from an economics point of view, we look at a transshipment, it makes no sense to keep a transshipment on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And still there is so much distance to cover. Okay. Or if you were going to integrate towards the East Asian part, like the East Asian Highway is doing, cutting through everything, and Burma is just above, it doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of wondering, not mysterious, because I'm not sure about the security angle. Matter of fact, security angle makes it more vulnerable rather than strength, because you're putting yourself in a position of vulnerability. So I don't know what your views on that are.
Maybe quickly, then we can also open it up for. So this question of strategy, I've been thinking a lot, because I know this question is going to come up. So I've been strategizing a 4-step answer. So one is, of course, the narrative of the security concern is there, but we're all kind of grappling in the dark. Somebody saying something, it's all cloak and daggers. Is it really happening? Who knows? If you ask somebody to say it's security, we don't know. So that's point number one. There's very interesting chatter in groups, in ex-defense groups, even on social media, where public, where a lot of and exactly like you're saying, even if we consider this to be strategically important, there is opinion that this is not the way to deal with that issue. So it's not like it's a universal, well-accepted point of view among defense, people who know defense better than I do. That's point number two. Point number three, the idea of, you're going to sit on top of the Malacca Straits and control it. I mean, that is, you can't control, it's an international shipping lane. So there's part of the rhetoric that, we can control, lots of traffic passes, we will see what happens, etc., etc. The other point, of course, like you mentioned, this is an out-and-out commercial project. You're saying 40,000 crores of a transshipment port. And the call for proposal that was issued by the Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Port Trust, which is handling this, all kinds of international players have bidded for it. So the Dutch, the here, the there, everywhere. So the defense angle is really not there in that sense. They use it very conveniently to deny, for example, RTI requests. All of them are said security, nahi milega. So bye-bye. And the last point is, even if all this is valid, what cost for the environment, economically, for the people, and the geological vulnerability? You put in a port project there, and what happens if there's a disaster?
It's just that kind of what you're asking for, at what cost, that question you're asking for, the answer to that requires an understanding of balancing, balancing the interests of that 400 people, the 400 Nicobarese. But that concern is missing, isn't it? Because you think that they are not important in your larger scheme of things. And I think the book has an article which is quite heartbreaking, really, because when the tsunami happened, they were relocated from Great Nicobar.
Great Nicobar,
from their hometown to
some other part
and
they want to come back.
They want to come back to their hometown, and they have this deep spiritual connection with their land, because the land for them is their mother, their father, their God, and they're not being allowed to come back. And for me, that's a heartbreaking thing. Those 400 people don't matter to you because they're just Nicobaris, they're tribe. Now they are riddled with disease, they're riddled with issues like alcoholism and so on. And the government won't let them go back to their land. So there are layers and layers over here that need a lot of unpacking, like Pankaj says, because it's not a straight question. We keep thinking, is it strategy, is it defense, is it security, is it economics? And the idea of balancing all of these things with a real concern for, say, the ecology or the people or flora and fauna, I don't think they care, too much. So, yeah, I think we need to talk about this a lot more. I'd like to welcome questions from the audience. Yeah, are you ready?
Yeah, I think we should, absolutely. And there's a mic to go around, na, Advaita?
Red shirt.
Now Vaishna's the boss now. She's going to identify people, yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk.
Just stand up if you don't mind, so others can see you.
And please do introduce yourself also.
I'm Aditya. I just finished my undergrad in mechanical engineering. Okay, and I'm from Shiv Nadar University. So I had an anecdote and then 2 questions, if you don't mind. So we had a conference in Shiv Nadar University. So there's a Center for Excellence of Himalayan Studies. And it was very similar in the sense that we were looking at the ecological impact in Ladakh as well, on the mega projects that have been done there as well. So there was also a divide in opinion there where, so the conference was completely by Ladakhi scholars. And there was a divide there as well where some of the Ladakhi scholars were like, you sit in Delhi with your liberal point of view and tell us that, okay, you can't have development here. But on the ground, what we see is that a lot of people do want upward social mobility and this project will help us. So how do you make this palatable to them as well to tell them that, these long-term impacts will have grave consequences for them as well? And secondly, I'm also going to do an MSc in Netherlands in STS. So I was wondering if you had any tips since I read that you did your PhD in Netherlands.
So it's a spot of career counseling as well. So.
Go to the Netherlands. Great place to study. Yeah, but I think, yeah. Should we take a couple of questions and then you want?
No, carry on.
No,
I'm
so
just asking for the mic to come here.
No, so I think the Himalayan connection and the island connection is a very interesting one. And if you see what's happening in the Himalayas, say in the name of defense with this whole road project, I think we've increased the vulnerability of that place manifold in this idea of that and in the idea of creating development, connection, etc. The Char Dham thing. I mean, the kind of disaster that's happening, the kind of costs that are being paid by people, leave alone the ecology and the rivers and stuff like that. But what you're saying, I think, is also very central to how do we deal with, or how do all of us deal with different people in different parts and what do they want? And I think there is probably no omnibus answer, but can we have more conversations? Can we listen to them? Can we go and ask them what they want? And also bring to their notice some of these things. So without sounding patronizing, in the islands, for instance, from what little I know, there's very little information on the tectonics and the geological dimension of this place. To have seen what they have seen is unimaginable what's happened in those islands. So I think if there's more information and more interaction, I think there'll be a larger understanding of what is at stake. And then finally, we are one set of players and it's not like we make the decisions. So something will happen and we'll see what happens in that.
I think if I might add to that, there's a clue in what both of them said about mega development. I think the answer is also in scale. So development need not always happen at that kind of level where you're bringing an island with 8,000 people, right? 5,000 people, and you want to bring 300,000 there. It's impossible. So maybe, scale is what we should be looking at and not saying no to development altogether.
Sir, my question.
Yeah.
My name is Anil Thakur. My question is, sir, what stage is this project at present? Has it started? Have they started moving all those monuments over there and bulldozers and things, or is it still in the thinking stage?
Quickly, if I answer, it's beyond the thinking stage. They have cleared the paper trail, so it's all clearances are in place. They can start tomorrow if they want to on the ground. But to the best of my knowledge, nothing is on the ground yet because it's going to take time. That place is not difficult to work in. So where the permissions are concerned, where the legalities are concerned, it's now open field. Or whether they start work, whether they're able to, whether they're able to get the information, the machinery, etc., 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 that there is still not started. And now with the monsoons, perhaps next few months, also I think the election results, there will be a little bit of a, if not a pushback, at least a thaw, because it's not like anybody's really pushing for that. It's just this idea that I think Lawrence very beautifully, this mega, this kind of something in the air. So little bit has started on the ground. Surveys are happening. Ecologists are going and studying, those kind of, maybe they're looking for those nest holes, I don't know. But they're doing some studies have kind of begun to kind of make it easier further, but nothing substantial on the ground, to the best of my knowledge.
Tenders have been floated, sir.
Not yet. Not to the best of my knowledge. No.
The gentleman in the white, yeah.
My name is Vinod Vyasalu. I'm not at all surprised that the form has been followed and there's no substance in it. That happens to all kinds of projects. On this one, could you tell me which are the companies that are pushing this project? Are they Indian companies? Are they multinationals?
I think it's a very interesting, I have not come across any of big corporate interest actually in this so far, as in terms of be pushing. It seems to be completely pushed by the state, primarily through the Niti Aayog. In the call for tenders for the port, there are, I forget the names now, about 10 international shipping companies, including the Adanis. There is one Dutch, there's one Swedish. I think the Jindals, if I remember right, have shown some interest. But otherwise, at least in the public domain on paper, there is no name that is there that seems to be associated with this. And I'll just give one very interesting point that I wanted to. The project proponent is a Port Blair-based quasi-government organization called the Andaman and Nicobar Island Development Corporation. They are the people who are getting the permission. They are the people who are applied for the permissions. They are a 300 crore company. That's the average annual turnover. They basically sell milk, liquor, and they do some tourism. So they're obviously a front, but beyond that, there doesn't seem to be anything. So that's why there is a question mark of what's pushing this and the point that Lawrence made.
Who were the consultants who prepared the Niti Aayog?
WAPCO.
So, sorry?
The consultants
Yeah.
who prepared the Niti Aayog.
So that is AECOM India Limited, which I mentioned in the very beginning. This is the Gurgaon-based company. And Vimta Labs in Hyderabad did the EIA, the one where mosquitoes were biting them. and then there have been some calls for DPRs for the port and all that, but I don't think they have yet been contracted, to the best of my knowledge. Yeah.
No, going on Vinod's, happy to see Vinod here. Question is, the other question I wanted to know, you can tell me, one is of course, what companies, consultants and so on. The other is, I get the feeling from a point of view of foreign investment. Today the thinking seems to be, there's no point going for piddling amounts of foreign investment. If you get it in large, huge amounts. So was going to ask you in this particular case, are there any, what is the composition of say, foreign investments expected? Or is there no information on it?
There might be, but I don't know. It's not something I've looked at. And that is something that I think we need to, that's a gap. The economic viability, the investments, the financial aspect. If there are researchers, academics, please look it up. That's a gap in what we've been able to do. But I don't have an answer to that, Lawrence.
But anyway,
either it's not there or I don't have access.
Like Chidambaram says in yesterday's or today's column in the Indian Express, among the good things he says will happen is that no more will projects come for a minister to sign. We may get to see it even in Parliament a little before a project comes. Okay? I mean, you should read that column. I just find the title because he has 1, 2, 3, 4 points. And this point struck me because in the last 10 years, there have been a number of cases where neither Parliament, nor the minister concerned, nor anybody has known. Okay? And it's basically Niti Aayog consultations, including with embassies in Delhi. So you don't know which embassies are driving it, who's saying if you go ahead, we'll give you and so on. Hopefully, we'll get more news on this. Yeah. But, not to slip into conspiracy, but I think that's the...
Well, it is well known that the US government did have a lot to do with the dilution of the Forest Laws Act as well. So the lady in yellow here.
I'm Sneha. I'm doing my PhD in Bangalore, and I'm also a member of Kalpavriksha, with which Pankaj is associated. I had two things to mention when you were wondering what's the strategy, why this project. So, in the Narmada Valley, where projects have been happening in the last 40 years, new projects are still coming up, even the downstream of the dam. So, the most recent one was Statue of Unity. And I know for a fact that the amount of money that was spent, a good amount of money was also spent to encourage influencers to go and promote it as a tourism spot. So I know that government also gets tourism revenue. Like what you mentioned in that project, this is component of, I think, habitation and tourism.
Yeah.
I don't understand that how much money they get to compensate for the amount they spend for the development. But there's also this component, and I don't think it's for filling the pockets of the government, but I think it has probably some other aspect to it. And second, one thing I was wondering, I have also volunteered with the Narmada Bachao Andaman, and I was wondering that amidst issues of huge amount of human rights violation, one of the only जो डूबते को तिनके का सहारा बोलते हैं, the only thing that remains with the Andaman is to fight their case in the NGT. So they are hanging on to a lot of environmental violations, and that remains the last thread by which they can probably, still fight their case.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things I want you to reflect on is that there is dilution, and there is they have entered into these sovereign and these more secular areas, these bodies as well, these institutions. They're no longer not biased. So that has also been happening simultaneously. Then what remains? Because I don't see, because the narrative of the greater common good is very, very strong. We are just a handful of people, and this is the IT capital. Most people here live by the greater common good, unless and until it comes to their door and affects them. So then, अगर NGT में भी नहीं जा सकते हैं, वहाँ पर भी dilution है, वहाँ पर भी bias है, वो अंदर घुस चुके हैं वहाँ पर भी, then what do you think? Will this project be stopped? Because it is hanging on to environmental violations as well.
So very quickly, I am very hopeful. And I think the very fact that we have this book over the last 3 years, the kind of interest that people have shown, journalists, so many people have kind of taken it up, social media, youth groups. There is concern, and I think one can only have hope. So we'll live with that. Yeah, I mean, that's the best. I mean, of course, we'll keep trying. We'll go to the NGT. We'll continue to write. We'll continue to, and I'm sure many of you will be have been part of it. So I think we can try one step at a time. That's the best I can do, and I can think. And of course, there are larger. We'll
evolve.
We'll evolve. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, please.
My name is Devre from Bangalore Environment Trust. Have all the legal avenues been exhausted already, or are any cases already in the court? NGT, High Court, Supreme Court, any idea about them?
In the book, Norma has done an extraordinarily good piece on this whole question of the strange thing is this is a project that's looming in the horizon. So whether all the basis on the law has been touched, not yet. The only thing is the NGT has said you can go ahead. I was going to say that in a recent, I think week or 2 weeks ago, there was a case where it seems now you can go to the Supreme Court against NGT judgment. And that's possible. So the NGT decision on this particular project, if it's going to start, maybe somebody will go and so on. Plus, I think with the new setup now in Delhi, from parliament to government, I don't know if they have an environment minister yet. Oh, Bhupendra Yadav, okay. From where?
He was the earlier environment minister.
Oh, correct, same guy. Correct. Yeah, same person. So one doesn't know. So one can wait and see what happens when Parliament convenes. I have some suggestions to the newly elected Rajya Sabha members. I'll keep that googly for the end.
There's a lady here, yeah.
My name is Anahita. Most of the discussion here has posited development versus the ecological impact, though you have raised questions about the impact on development itself. But given the fact that this is in this seismic zone and difficult as a project itself, apart from the cost, I'm wondering if you can speak a bit more on that. For example, is international finance interested in this? I'm talking about now the banks and insurance companies, given how volatile the project itself might be. Or is in the strategic interest, has the Quad, for example, been supportive of this project as an eye in that critical area? Because if not, that raises other questions. And I have two small questions. How much of a population can that island actually support by itself, or is everything going to be imported? And the last, a larger question, you ended with what can we do? We are talking about the NGT, which will be done by a very small number, but what can we do?
So quickly on the finance question, and I think Lawrence also mentioned, I don't think there's much interest or conversation, certainly not in the public domain, and I am also not privy to anything. So there doesn't seem to be. So it's still at that government, intergovernment, at that level, to my understanding. Where strategic, see, there's a lot of rhetoric. If you look at the media on this project, you have lots of opinion, all kinds of people writing about how this is very important. And they're generally talking about sometimes the Andaman, sometimes the Tri-Command, sometimes Nicobar, sometimes. So it's a little bit like a mess. But yes, it's important and that discussion is there. Your third question, your first small question was?
How much island can hold?
That's a very difficult question to answer. Because people are saying, oh, look at Bombay, look at Singapore.
Yeah.
I mean, Singapore was like 50 years ago, was like what the islands are today. So we can do what we want in that sense. Port Blair itself has 1.5 lakh people. So that's a kind of tricky question. It's a chicken first, egg first kind of thing. So you create the infrastructure, you have people, I'm assuming. But do we need to have so many people in that place when there's so much more to do elsewhere? That would be my non-answer. And third, so what we can do, I think 4 or 5 things. One is I do feel that the more each one of us is informed about what's happening, that of course will have to be the first step. 2, I think there's writing to concerned authorities, and I think we do underestimate that kind of possibility of informing concerned ministries, because that letter, that public letter by the Constitution Conduct Group following the frontline special issue, a very prominent set of people, and that really had a huge impact. I mean, that was a letter, I think, to either the president or it was to the National Commission on Scheduled Tribes, and that got really picked up. So as journalists, there's so much to write, there's so much to investigate. There's a lot of money being given to environmental organizations to do this research. I mean, WII, SACON, others, the Zoological Survey of India, what is this money for? Who is getting it? What are they doing? What are these projects? So I think every little cover of the onion that we peel away, we'll understand that better. The thing with that organization in Port Blair, I've written about it a little bit, but how come they are doing this project? A 300 crore company, how can you be doing a 70,000 crore project? So that's at one level. I think social media can be a great multiplier, and we've had some fantastic campaigns which the youth groups have put out. That will work. So if there are designers, there are people in social media, influencers, please influence in the right way. And then of course going to court. So in some senses it's the standard thing that one would say, but there is a lot that can actually can be done.
Ravi? No, there's a question of Ravi.
Ravi Challam, I'm a wildlife biologist based here in Bangalore. Several comments. The first, not about this Nicobar, but the development model for Andamans was post-tsunami by our revered president, ex-president Abdul Kalam. He wanted Andamans turned into Singapore. This was within weeks after the tsunami.
Yeah.
This is the same guy who's pushed for interlinking of rivers. I mean, he might be a great guy, but he knows zilch of ecology. I mean, after a tsunami, you want multi-story buildings built at the very same place. But apart from that, none of this should surprise us. Rule of law has been, where is rule of law? In this country today, rule of law doesn't exist. Impunity is the name of the game. That each project, the more we dig into, we are only going to get more and more of this. At least in this project, they've done the good ticking exercise. In many other projects, even the ticking exercise doesn't happen. But what is the tick worth? You open the cover of each of these reports, you know it's garbage. I'm ex-WII. I'm sorry, that institution has lost its moral compass. Not 1 rupee in the name of research in a place like this should go to places like WI anymore. If they can give an ecological clearance to the world's most important leatherback turtle nesting site, where is ecology? Where is your moral compass? And we're seeing it. The Supreme Court ordered the translocation of lions in 2013. We have not moved on that. But cheetahs can come from Africa. There's just absolutely no logic. And I also think we shouldn't dignify destruction of nature by calling it development anymore. Don't use the word development in these contexts. It's actually destruction of nature. Because the language is important. Development connotes a certain positive thing, but it's really destruction of nature, destruction of people's life. And the betrayal is not just of Nicobar. It's of all of India, and it's a global betrayal. And I have a lot more to say.
Thanks, Ravi. I have a question here. The gentleman in black. Then the lady in blue, and then perhaps.
You had a question.
Over here.
Maybe you can give one of these mics for quick
Yeah,
movement.
you can take this.
Hi,
There's
my
a
name is
lady in
Nikhil
blue,
Krishnamurthy,
Salman.
and first of all, I'd like to thank you for that most excellent and eye-opening presentation. I'm going to get your book on the way out the door. As somebody who's traveled frequently to the Andamans, it really affected me. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, okay, we have this development that's proposed. Do we have any data on any previous development that's happened in the Andamans that's of some large size? What is the other largest development that's happened in the Andamans? I know the Far Eastern Naval Command is situated over there, probably some ports and so on and so forth. Do we have any data on the environmental impact those developments have had in the past, which would then give us a clue as to what would happen in the future?
The scale of this is completely unmatched. There is nothing in the islands. See, the total population of the islands after 150 years of colonization of that place is 4,500 people. 400,000 people. Now, in this one island, you want to put in 300,000, 600,000 people. So there really is nothing to kind of match up to what this is now being proposed. And otherwise, it's been small and scattered and not very well organized. So I think it's a damn good question, but I don't think there is an answer in that sense because the scale is completely crazy over here. So there's nothing to say as to what might be based. Nothing comparative.
Nothing to correlate.
Nothing really. Except to say that, for example, Port Blair, which is the capital town, in summer months, and if you travel to the islands, gets water. The citizens of Port Blair get water once in 4 or 5 days in their taps, in an area of 3,000 millimeters of annual rainfall. And that's a very easily addressable problem because you do water harvesting, etc., etc. But there you cannot manage, and water can be a problem because it's an island system. It's a rocky ground. It's not very easy. So, but no, there is nothing to compare actually. I don't think so.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you. That was a great presentation. My name is Preeti David. I'm a journalist. I want to know, you mentioned briefly something about what local people are saying or any kind of local activism. Can you just give us a little insight into any kind of local activism that is happening there, people who are with you or see it the way you've been seeing it?
So there are broadly.
Can you just pass the mic to the gentleman behind you?
So there are two sets of people in the island. One is the settler populations who have come 70s onwards, who were brought in by the state to kind of show Indian presence. And then there are the indigenous communities. I think by and large, the settler populations want the project because of some of the discussions we had. The indigenous peoples are in some senses, pretty much out of the discussion. The Shompenes are not even accessible. They are the what's called the PVTG, the particularly vulnerable tribal group, who actually live remote. They are not aggressive in the kind the other Andaman tribes are, like the Sentinelese or the Jarawava, but they live remote lives somewhere in the forests, and they live perfectly all right. And they come to settlement sometimes to get some exchange, tobacco, rice, stuff like that. So we know very little of how they live their lives even, leave alone what they think. We can't even have a conversation with them. But there is some account in conversations by anthropologists, actually a group of anthropologists who had been asked by the Niti Aayog to get their opinion on record saying we don't want this kind of big development or whatever they said it was. That's one. And like Vaishna was saying, the other community, which is the Nicobarese community, which is far more integrated with the outside world, has written formally saying that we feel cheated by what was told to us about the project. And we withdraw our clearance and we want to go back to where we were before the tsunami came. But whether that's activism per se, whether they have the voice, there are a few people working there who cannot be named, who cannot be visible, who are trying to work with some of the people. But that's very small. And the only voice we have from there is this communication from the Nicobaris, and they're very well connected with the outside world. It's not like they need us for them to speak. But they have said very clearly now that they don't want this project.
They actually said that we've been lied to.
They've been lied to. That's what they say in their community.
Them out of education, out of health care, out of all the state whatever state funding they can get, so that then this development project then becomes the only alternative which will probably give them some kind of a better standard of life. So do you see that also happening in the...
No, I don't think so. I don't think they've thought about it so much. And we have to also, I think, recognize in a way that probably I can't explain that the Andaman and Nicobar are very different. They're very different from our experiences on the mainland. For the nature of the history, the nature of people, the nature of relationships that people have with the land, people have amongst themselves. So the standard tropes that we are used to may not necessarily work. We have to work through it. We have to understand that much better. Because in some senses, it's a very rich landscape because there's a lot of government money in there. Among the biggest employers in the islands is the state. There's no real industry, or maybe a little bit of, there used to be timber, then there's some tourism, there's no real commercial fishery, and they're very far away. I mean, to get to from Port Blair to Great Nicobar takes 2 days, and there are 2 ships a week. So if you miss one ship, you miss the flight. It's crazy combinations. So it's a completely different ball game.
There's one more thing I wanted to say. From the time of the British, when the mainlanders tried contacting the tribal people, there have been instances when they've brought in diseases that they never knew existed, and they've been responsible for decimating tribes over there. It's extremely it's gut-wrenching to know what we could do to another people simply by pretending that we were bringing development. So Ravi said, what is this development we are speaking about, and how much are we thinking through about what it means for this other person? I just wanted to tell you a small line from the book where this Dr. Ravi Shankaran, who researched the Nicobar megaport, he said to one of the people who went in there, remember, this is their land, their space, their rights matter more than ours. I thought that was, sort of encapsulated it so well. The bearded gentleman just behind you.
Sorry. Gopa Kumar here. Hi, Pankaj. Just wanted to ask you this question about the seismic activity in the area. So have there been any seismic studies that have been done with predictions made for the next 50, 100 years like there's been done in the Himalayas? And is there also a seismic impact assessment like you have in EIA that's been done on this project?
I think our answer is no. I mean, I don't know. I mean, whether there's a long-term impact.
They will not tell us.
Whether there's a long-term study of, I don't know. I've not come across it, but there's a good possibility is there, and I don't know. And the way the project has been, projected and proposed and conceived, there does not seem to be an account. And actually in the book, we have a very lovely article by Janki Andharia and her team at the Jamshedji Tata Institute for Disaster Studies at TIS. And they've actually mapped out the seismic activity, and they say, they've looked at data and say that in the last 50 earthquakes, one earthquake a week, they have recorded in a 10 or 20 kilometer radius of the port site. So with that seismic activity, if that's not accounted for, and she makes a very interesting thing saying that what they are saying in terms of the impact, in terms of how they will deal with it, is like saying that when the rain starts, we will rain-proof our house. That's the analogy she gives, which is problematic because this is not rainfall. This is something completely else in that sense and the scale. So I think it's completely ignorant of that reality in many ways.
I am Vinay, and I'm a research scholar at ETRI, Bangalore. I have two questions. So the first is how can you see the timing of this book inaugurations? Like it is election time also, and we got the result also. And the MP from that area is also from the same ruling parties. So how can you see the people's sentiment that if they wanted to change see this change, so why they are voting in that part for the same party? And the second question is like, you are making this betrayal visible to everyone, like even for the couples. So, and you are also an academician, and you are working in one of a big institute. That's to a government institute. So, are you facing any challenges at personal level or at in your profession? So, I want to know that. Thank you.
He was my student in IIT Bombay, so he's like really needling me. He's really needling me. No, so, no, I mean, to be honest, it's not been, so far, no questions have been asked. And I've in some senses, I'm surprised, but I'm also not surprised. It's like IIT Bombay is a reasonably open and welcoming place in that sense. So that's not been a problem so far. And maybe we're not doing such dangerous work. Maybe other people are kind of, and there has been pushback in IIT Bombay in very crazy ways, as a matter of fact. So, I mean, it's public knowledge. G.N. Devi was invited for a talk, and then the day before he came, he said, you can't, the institute said you can't come. It was a public invitation, and he had been invited 6 months earlier, and then something happened in the institute. So, but so far I've not been asked any questions. Your first question was, yeah, okay, that's kind of about now the election timing of the book. See, timing of a book, it's never in your hands. We all think that you have planned it, aisa hota hai, waisa hota hai. I wanted this book 6 months earlier. I was hoping it would happen, but things take place. So when the book was released and we planned all these events, it was still before the elections, and I was really wondering as to what will we say in these events, in these book release events, if this happens, if that happens. And one does feel a sense of relief. I think there is this general sense of relief. We might not be having. So there is, I think there is a sense of relief, and one does feel a little more comfortable. And hopefully there will be more positive response to something of this kind. But, planning of a book release and book publication around all these things never happens actually. It looks very attractive to make that case, but it's never the case. And there are a couple of people, but maybe quickly you want to...
Yeah, I mean, there is still hope. I mean...
Absolutely.
Home insurance companies are refusing to insure homes in California now, knowing it's sitting on the ring of fire and the kind of high insurance value, these projects might not get insurance unless Indian company like SBI was forced to give a loan to Adani in Carmichael Mines. You might find, in terms of FRA, is there any defense we can draw from the Forest Rights Act?
So,
finish. In terms of action, I think we should name and shame. As we recognize each company, we should start, if it's Dutch, write to the Dutch media. I mean, we just have to do that. And as you said, we should not underestimate the power of citizen action. If each of us wrote to the Prime Minister's office, if each of us wrote to the Lieutenant Governor of Andaman and Nicobar, not copy-paste, but our own. I mean, it need not be long missives, 2-3 paragraphs, showing our concern, expressing our concern. Talk about this over dinner and lunch. Then it has to become mainstream. That's the only way to change it, I think.
No, absolutely. I mean, certainly doable. Yeah, quickly on the FRA, yes, so that's, I think there has been some discussion and there might be a lot of hope in actually pegging this on the FRA, because there's an articulation saying that this is clear violation of the FRA, and there's some discussion on bringing it to court, so we have to see. And I must admit that, you know, it's everything we've not covered all sides, and we do need more people to do all other kinds of things. I mean, legal action, research, writing letters, economic analysis. I mean, everything is open field. I mean, there's a lot of information on this project, but there's a lot more that can be done. So it's very welcome if we have more people join hands and do what you can.
You made a reference to Indra Point. Earlier it was known as Pygmalion Point. Who was Pygmalion and what is his role in the history of Andamans?
I don't know, maybe...
It's the myth, yeah. Pygmalion isn't a real person. The Pygmalion is a myth. Is a myth of creation on which Bernard Shaw wrote that famous play. Yeah. Yeah, there is no, as far as I know, there's no historical, it's a myth. It's a mythical
But the question is, why is that point called Pygmalion?
That might be, yeah.
It may not be there anymore if the project comes, so then...
The point might go away, the point might cease to exist.
The point has already changed.
Yeah.
It's already...
Like this point, Calimere also,
yeah, I understand now.
find out the origin.
That is Theodore's kind of question.
We're absolutely out of time. I think a couple of questions got left out. I'm so sorry, but we don't have any more time. Thank you so much for coming, and please pick up a copy of the book if you can. A lot of your questions answered in the book. Of course.
Now, I'm thinking of this what is to be done question. And I was thinking of this on my journey from Mysore to Bangalore. The other side of Pankaj is an extraordinarily important side. That is citizen science. This book is there. And if you can get it, it's very good. They have it there, I know. I missed to review it in Frontline. Somebody jumped the queue. Yes. And it is about citizen science and ecology in India. Then I was thinking around this and reading his book. There's so much for citizen science and ecology there that you don't go simply as a tourist. So I'm just connecting some points. Then when I was thinking of citizen science, I was also thinking of organizations like Agastya, who have a very big presence in Bangalore. And one of the big philanthropists who has done some extraordinary contribution in terms of money and interest is Madam Sudha Murthy. She has shown this interest. So I was thinking, instead of writing to the Prime Minister and the Governor and so on, I was just thinking, imagining, Sudha Murthy is being nominated to the Rajya Sabha. What will be her first speech in the Rajya Sabha? I don't know, maybe she's already drafting it, writing it, or speech writers are writing, I don't know. Why don't the citizens of Bangalore write to her and say, this is a great idea as your first speech in Rajya Sabha. If you want more information, we'll send you. And tell her, given your interest in science, for the future of ecology of this country, for the future of training the young people in ecology, and your own passion about it, why don't you talk about what's happening in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands? And why don't you try to see, as your maiden speech in Rajya Sabha, if you can at least bring more attention to the public. Because I think, I'm thinking of this because during the Bhopal accident, when there were all kinds of stratagems done to avoid taking responsibility for the victims, a group of people from Bombay took a petition and met all the parliamentarians and stopped a law which was trying to somehow avoid responsibility. So it's high time we wrote to our elected representatives. High time we started putting pressure on them rather than simply write to these prime ministers and others, because we don't know what will happen. There's just an idea that came to me, connecting citizen science and so on. And maybe I myself will write to Sudhamurthy. And if all of you can write it, saying, I'm a citizen of Bangalore, we attended this event, this book is here, we're very curious to know what will be your speech in the Rajya Sabha, because she has to make a first inaugural speech. And every member of the Rajya Sabha, they put a lot of thought to it. And I thought this must be a great one for her to do as an inaugural speech. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panelists and Champaka for bringing today's session to BIC and the audience for your time and questions.